Rudolph Fentz. Everyone buckle up, we're taking a trip, a literal one, back to New York City, circa 1950. Picture the scene. Times Square is buzzing, the bright lights are flashing, and people are going about their day when suddenly, enter stage left, a man looks like he took a wrong turn from a Charles Dickens novel. He's rocking a top hat, mutton chop sideburns, and the kind of coat that screams Victorian chic. This bewildered gentleman was none other than Rudolph Fentz. Now, if you're wondering what kind of cosplay event he was crashing, here's the kicker. He wasn't in costume. This was his everyday wear, or at least it was in the 1870s. Fentz's confusion was on full display. I mean, imagine stepping into Times Square from 1876. You go from gas lamps to neon billboards, horse-drawn carriages to honking yellow cabs, and people hurrying past with their noses buried in newspapers, the 1950s version of being glued to a smartphone. Poor guy must have thought he'd wandered into some kind of bizarre carnival. Sadly, the disorientation didn't last long. Moments later, bam! Fentz was struck by a car. It's a harsh and unexpected way to wrap up a potential century-spanning time slip. It's like time travel said, here's a taste of the future. Just kidding. Now here's where it gets even weirder. When the authorities examined Fentz's belongings, they probably felt like they'd walked straight into a steampunk mystery novel. Among his possessions were a business card with his name from the 1970s, a receipt for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage, and some 19th century coins that hadn't been in circulation for over 70 years. Oh, and there was a letter addressed to Rudolph Fentz with an 1876 postmark. Imagine the cops scratching their heads. Did we just arrest a ghost or a really committed historical reenactor? Naturally, this bizarre case caught the attention of the press, conspiracy theorists, and amateur detectives everywhere. A deeper dig into history showed that, sure enough, a man named Rudolph Fentz did vanish mysteriously in 1876. According to records, he was last seen going for a late-night stroll, then poof, disappeared without a trace. Talk about an epic walk gone wrong. People speculated that maybe he'd taken a century-long detour through a time vortex, proving that sometimes the road less traveled is really inconvenient. But wait, hold on to your top hats, because the story takes an even stranger twist. Years later, some pesky researchers decided to pull at the threads of the legend, only to discover it had roots in a sci-fi story published by a writer named Jack Finney in the 1950s. Yep, Rudolph Fentz may have been a figment of Finney's imagination that somehow slipped into urban folklore. Or maybe, just maybe, the fictional story was inspired by real events. Cue the X-Files theme. John Titor. Alright, so picture this. It's the early 2000s, the world's still buzzing from surviving Y2K, the internet's mostly dial-up, and social media is nothing but forums and chat rooms. Suddenly, this guy pops up online claiming to be a time traveler from 2036. Cue eyebrow raise. His name? John Titor. Not exactly the sleekest name for a sci-fi hero, but hey, it's catchy enough. John didn't just stroll in saying, "Hey, I'm from the future," and leave. Nope, this guy had stories. First off, he warned everyone about a coming US Civil War that would eventually lead to World War III. Yup, you heard that right. A civil war so intense it'd make the 1860s Civil War look like a minor disagreement at Thanksgiving dinner. He had details too, claiming it would start with civil unrest in 2004 and culminate in a full-blown nuclear conflict by 2015. Check SWAT. Thankfully, we're still here. Though some of us might argue we've lived through plenty of civil unrest since then. But Titor wasn't just doom and gloom. He had a mission. Apparently, the future was in dire need of, wait for it, an IBM 5100 computer. Now, it wasn't just some fancy sci-fi contraption. It was a clunky, boxy 1975-era computer that'd make today's laptops laugh out loud. Why? Well, according to John, this computer had some special hidden features that only a few people knew about. Capabilities to debug and translate legacy code. In 1975, this might have sounded like nerdish gibberish, but here's the kicker. It was true. The IBM 5100 did have unique coding functions that weren't public knowledge. How did he know that? Either Titor was the real deal, or had access to an absurdly niche trivia fact that would make any computer geek proud. And let's talk about his time machine. This was no polished sci-fi box or slick time-traveling phone booth. Nope. John claimed his C204 gravity distortion time displacement unit was mounted in a 1967 Chevy Corvette. Because when you're a time-traveling soldier, you obviously need to make those quantum jumps in style. He even posted schematics, which were about as confusing as IKEA furniture instructions on steroids. Still, It fascinated people. Was this just an elaborate ruse or a crazy genius trying to keep one foot in the future and one in the past? Naturally, people started asking questions. Tons of them. What happened to the stock market? Could they get winning lottery numbers? John dodged specifics, but hinted he couldn't interfere too much, lest the timeline police come knocking. And just like that, by 2001, he logged off and never returned. Talk about a mysterious exit. It was the digital equivalent of dropping the mic after a wild conspiracy concert. Then, there's the nuclear apocalypse prediction he casually mentioned. According to Teter, we'd all be barbecuing marshmallows by 2015 because of nuclear fallout. Clearly, that didn't happen. So what gives? Was he off by a few decades? Was it all a giant trolling exercise? Or did he actually prevent it by changing the past? Now, that's a plot twist for a Netflix series. Andrew Carlssin. Imagine the year 2003. Wall Street is bustling and suddenly, this guy named Andrew Carlssin comes out of nowhere, turning a modest $800 investment into a whopping $350 million in just 2 weeks. Understandably, the Securities and Exchange Commission swoops in like a hawk, demanding answers. His defense? Oh, I'm a time traveler from 2256. Right, Andrew. Sure. But here's the thing. Carlson went on to prove his claim by making shockingly accurate predictions about the market shifts and events. He even offered to spill secrets about the location of Osama bin Laden and a cure for AIDS if the authorities would go easy on him. The story blew up. While most reasonable people called hoax, a small part of the internet went, but what if? Cue the Twilight Zone music. Before he could be fully investigated, Carlson vanished without a trace. No record of him, no court appearances, just gone. So, was it a clever prank that spiraled out of control or an actual temporal tourist who decided stocks were more exciting than sightseeing? Either way, he left behind a mystery and probably some stressed out SEC agents who needed a good vacation. If you've ever made a bad investment, just remember, at least you didn't claim to be a time traveler to cover your losses. Or maybe next time you should. Just don't expect the government to be amused. Man from Terer. Strap in for this one. Because The Man from Terer is an airport story that makes lost luggage seem boring. In 1954, a well-dressed man arrived at Tokyo's Haneda Airport carrying a passport from a country called Terer. Yeah, you got that right. There is no Terer. The custom officers were like, sir, you've got some explaining to do. He pointed to Andorra on a map, insisting that his country Terer has been around for centuries and was not some imaginary place. They placed him in a guarded hotel room while they investigated. Guess what happened next? By morning, he was gone, just vanished. No trace, no record of him ever checking in or out. His passport papers and the rest of his belongings? All gone. It's like he was wiped from existence or slipped back into whatever reality he claimed to be from. Did he step into a glitch between dimensions or like cosmic layover gone wrong? Or was he a highly skilled con artist who pulled off the ultimate vanishing act? People still love to theorize about him. Maybe he was from a parallel universe that crossed paths with ours just for a moment. Maybe he was a bored time traveler testing the patience of airport security. Or maybe it's all an elaborate urban legend that makes custom officers groan every time it resurfaces. Next time you're at an airport, just think about how normal your passport seems in comparison. Unless you're from Atlantis, in which case, we need to have a chat. Philadelphia Experiment. Here's a Navy story with so many twists, even the seagulls got dizzy. Back in 1943, legend has it that the US Navy conducted a secret experiment in Philadelphia. So what was their goal? Make the USS Eldridge a warship invisible to enemy radar using electromagnetic fields? Cool concept, right? But according to some reports, they didn't just achieve radar invisibility. They made the ship physically vanish. Poof, gone. Then, it supposedly reappeared miles away in Norfolk, Virginia. Oh, and did I mention it allegedly traveled through time for a few seconds? Because, of course it did. Now, if this is starting to sound like a Hollywood plot gone off the rails, wait for the horror movie twist. When the ship reappeared, some crew members were reportedly fused with the hull, while others vanished, went insane, or started aging unnaturally. Total nightmare fuel, right? The Navy, for its part, has denied all of this ever happened. But hey, they would say that, wouldn't they? The story gained more steam thanks to Carlos Allende, a guy who claimed to have witnessed the experiment and wrote letters that read like a fever dream poetry. Skeptics have poked enough holes in this story to sink a ship, but for believers, it's a classic tale of military secrecy, botched experiments, and a reality-bending accident. And if you ask me, that's enough to make even the Twilight Zone jealous. Mobberly Jordane. When two respectable British school teachers take a trip to the Palace of Versailles in 1901, the last thing they'd expect is to wander into the 18th century. But that's exactly what Anne Mobberly and Eleanor Jordane swore happened. One sunny day, they were casually strolling through the gardens, then suddenly, things got weird. The atmosphere turned heavy and unnatural, and people around them were dressed in 18th century clothes, behaving like characters from a period drama. Oh, and they reportedly saw Marie Antoinette sketching, as if she had better things to do than get guillotined. The woman left Versailles with more questions than souvenirs, and they later published their experience anonymously as an adventurer. The tale ignited a frenzy. Some people thought it was proof of a time slip. Others thought it was just a big old prank. But here's the eyebrow raiser. Mobberly and Jordane had no history of making up stories, and they both swore they saw the same thing. Theories range from mass hallucination to parallel dimensions colliding. Or maybe Versailles just has really committed reenactors? Regardless, if you ever feel like you're surrounded by people from another country, you might just be reliving a famous time slip. Or you've taken a wrong turn at a Renaissance fair. Time-traveling hipster. Okay, picture this. A black and white photo from the 1940s showing a crowd gathered at the reopening of South Fork Bridge in Canada. Everyone's rocking their best old-timey clothes except for one guy. He's wearing what looks suspiciously like a modern hoodie, sunglasses, and a graphic t-shirt. The internet exploded with claims that this time-traveling hipster had casually strolled into a historical moment like he was just stopping by a coffee shop to grab a matcha latte. Skeptics had a field day, posting out that the sunglasses were actually period-appropriate protective glasses and that, while his style was admittedly funky, nothing he wore was definitively futuristic. But come on, folks! This guy has the smirk of someone who knows he's going viral in the future. Maybe he was a traveler caught off guard by paparazzi-level attention. Or maybe he was just one very early adopter of modern trends. If only we could ask him where he got that hoodie. While conspiracy theorists continue to debate his authenticity, you have to admit, it's almost poetic how a single snapshot could launch 1,000 theories. I mean, time-traveling tourists in casual wear? If he wasn't from the future, he definitely had self-confidence of someone who knew he'd be internet famous one day. So, next time you're at a historical site, keep an eye out for anyone looking suspiciously modern or scrolling through their phone when there's definitely no Wi-Fi. Either they're a time traveler or just really bored. Both are equally plausible. Green children. Picture medieval England, specifically the village of Woolpit. It's the 12th century, so everything is already weird. One day, two kids, a brother and a sister, emerge from a wolf pit. Yes, a literal pit of trapping wolves, with green skin, wearing bizarre clothes and speaking an unknown language. Instead of freaking out, the villagers did the most medieval thing ever. They gave the kids bread. Except the children refused to eat anything but raw broad beans. Yes, they were picky eaters and green. Double trouble. After some time, their skin eventually turned normal, and they learned enough English to share their tale. They claimed to have come from a place called St. Martin's Land, which was in permanent twilight. They were herding cattle when they somehow entered a cave and emerged in a wool pit. The boy died soon after, but the girl adapted and allegedly lived a regular medieval life, which in those days meant surviving plague and, well, more pits. Were they aliens? Or victims of temporal accident and deposited them in 12th century England? While some historians believe the green complexion was due to malnutrition, others are ready to throw down with theories of parallel universes, underground civilizations, and, of course, time travel. At the very least, they left medieval Woolpit with an enduring legend, and probably the worst Yelp review for medieval cuisine. Whatever the truth, if you ever meet green-skinned kids in a pit, at least offer them a broader menu than beans. It might change their entire timeline. Chronovisor. Let's end with the granddaddy of all time travel conspiracies, the Chronovisor. According to legend, this device was built in the 1950s by Father Pellegrino Ernetti, a Benedictine monk. He and a team of brilliant scientists, allegedly including Nobel laureate Enrico Fermi, created a machine that could see and record events from the past. Think of it as a time-traveling TV. You want to watch the crucifixion of Christ? Pop in the coordinates and voila! Popcorn-worthy tragedy. Father Ernetti claimed he used it to witness ancient Rome, the crucifixion, and even a lost play by Quintus Ennius, the father of Roman poetry. Sadly, Ernetti never shared hard proof. He provided a photograph of Christ on the cross, which skeptics quickly dismissed as a blurry religious artwork. Conveniently, after Ernetti's death, all traces of the Chronovisor reportedly vanished, either hidden by the Vatican to protect history or, prevented tourism boom, or just because it never existed. The idea of the Chronovisor is tantalizing. Imagine having access to any historical moment with a simple dial twist. But given the lack of any solid evidence, this one might just be a blend of sci-fi and wishful thinking. If the Vatican does have a time machine, they're being super stingy about sharing it. So, if you ever find yourself chatting with a time-traveling priest, at least ask him if he's got the Chronovisor remote handy. And maybe if he can rewind last week's embarrassing work presentation while he's at it.